to start, sir. Vice Admiral S.J. Singh, Flag Officer Commanding-in-Chief, Western Naval Command, Admiral V.S. Shekhawat, former Chief of Naval Staff, Flag Officers, Officers, Veterans, esteemed guests, members of media, ladies and gentlemen, welcome. My name is Prachi Mali, Research Associate at the Maritime History Society. I welcome you all to this seminar on the Royal Indian Naval Uprising of 1946. I would take this opportunity to brief you about the Maritime History Society. An academic initiative of the Western Naval Command, Maritime History Society is involved in promoting India's maritime heritage through seminars, courses, internships, heritage walks, publications, and consultancy services. We are proud to be collaborating with the National Maritime Heritage Complex to set up a maritime museum and experience center at Cloth Hill. Let me now speak about today's seminar. The struggle for India's independence has seen multiple stories of sacrifice and courage. To free our country from the shackles of injustice and discrimination, the revolt of 1857 gained recognition as the first war of independence. However, we often fail to acknowledge the importance of the Royal Indian Naval Uprising of 1946 that proved to be an inflection point in the terminal period of India's freedom struggle. In this seminar, we aim to uncover the causes that led to this uprising and its significance in the overall ambit of our freedom struggle. This seminar will be moderated by Commodore M. Durai Babu. The speakers for the session are Ms. Janvi Rokegaonkar and Commodore Shrikant B. Kesnur. I take this opportunity to introduce the moderator of today's gathering. Commodore M. Durai Babu was commissioned in July 1997. He is currently posted at the Maritime History Society as the Additional Director. He was awarded the Nav Sena Medal Gallantry in 2005. He is also a recipient of the CNS Commendation in 2016. He has authored the latest history book of the Indian Navy and another coffee table book on INS Sudarshani's epic ASEAN Voyage. He has also edited several books and publications. I now hand over the proceedings to Commodore Durai Babu. Over to you, sir.
Permission to continue, sir? Morning, Commander-in-Chief, Respective of Command, ladies and gentlemen. Thank you for the warm introduction, Prachi. With our education system pre-emphasizing STEM subjects, that is science, technology, engineering, and mathematics, fine arts and history gets relegated from our collective thinking. Important and epochal events, for example, the 1946 RN Uprising, fades to nothing more than a footnote in our struggle for freedom, struggle for independence. Some instances, like the Madras famine between 1876 and 78, claimed about 40 to 50 lakh Indians. The Bengal famine in 1943 claimed about 30 lakh. But we are more familiar with the Holocaust, terminating at 60 lakh Jewish people. Similarly, the Jallianwala Bagh massacre had a recorded 379 victims and is well known. But it is lesser known that the Royal Indian Navy Uprising saw more than 230 deaths of common citizens and a majority of them here in this city of Mumbai. So we have here with us two eminent speakers who could well be termed experts of the event due to their extensive research and command over the subject.
Flag officers, veterans, Honorable Chair, fellow speaker Commodore Kesnur, naval personnel, students, maritime enthusiasts, ladies and gentlemen. It is my humble privilege to stand here in front of an august audience like you, and at the outset, I thank NHS for
contribution to the Allied forces' efforts in World War II, leading to Indian representation in the United Nations. Believe me, while the main buffet will be served by Commodore Keshwar, I am here only to serve the appetizers. The aim of my talk is to highlight the role and the contribution of Indians in World War II, which otherwise remains a footnote in global history by assessing the archival documents and photographs available in the digital sphere. So without further ado, let me get right on to it. The naval fleet was the sword arm of the British Raj that aided in their imperialist agenda. From its origins in 1612 as the East India Company's naval fleet, it transitioned through time and have been known by varying titles since their first inception, which is flashed on the screen. It was in 1892 when the designation of Royal Indian Marine was adopted. Thereon, it finally changed to Royal Indian Navy in 1934 and remained so, even until after Indian independence, when it finally assumed Indian Navy once we assumed our republic status on 26 January 1950. So rewinding a little to why it was prefixed as Royal. The revolt of 1857 in India, which is also known as the First War of Indian Independence, was suppressed by the British. It led to the transfer of power from the English East India Company to the English Crown. The Queen's Proclamation of 1858 was declared, which brought India as a colony and directly under the control of the British monarch. It is said that the Queen's Proclamation was read out on the steps of the town hall at the Asiatic Society in Bombay. Over years, the role of British naval service in India varied. The primary aim was to keep the British naval service in India varied. The primary aim was to keep the Arabian Sea and the Persian Gulf free of any aggression against the maritime trade. It was to keep the sea lines open with a safe environment. But the two world wars fought between 1914 to 1918 and 1939 to 1945 changed the nature and the role of the naval fleet in India. As Britain declared war on Germany in 1914, Indian independence became imminent, and since it was a British colony, India became a focal point for the war effort as it had an expansive sheltered hub and it was a best port facility to the east of the Suez. And it displayed right here. It is the scope of the theatre of the war. The Northern African campaign, the Gallipoli campaign, the China operations, Indians were an integral part of it. The First World War caught the Indian educated middle class psyche at a very fragile point, between a residual loyalty to the empire and to the restless nationalist consciousness in India. Fundraising was organized and meetings were held in Calcutta, in Bombay and major cities. Special prayers were offered in mosques and temples. It was as if the Indian gods and goddesses also were enlisted for the allied causes and to fight the war of the British cause. The Indians supported the First World War by contributing a large sum of money in addition to troops and ammunition. The raw material was also passed from here. Over the last century or so, there has been a large degree of amnesia across much of India about the country's role in the conflict. In my observation, less attention has been paid to the social and cultural responses to the war within India, and the recruitment of the troops is one amongst them. Most of the soldiers came from non- or semi-literate backgrounds. Recruitment was done on an informal basis. Force. While the Royal Indian Marine played a crucial role in the First World War, it became certain that as a naval force, it was not well equipped with combatant responsibilities. As we have noted earlier, Indians were recruited heavily without taking into consideration their expertise in the naval domain. Their lack of understanding thus limited their roles to the non-combatant aspects of the war. The experience in the First World War provided important insights that recruitment alone would not account for the better function of the naval division. It was also important to pay attention to provide rigorous training to the ones who enlisted in the naval service. Hence, the reorganization of the naval service in India was called for. A lot was debated on the nature and role of the service and of the personnel, and the recommendations of the Royal Indian Marine Reorganization Department Committee were all accepted. The Royal Indian Marine was to undergo a lot of transitions beginning from its name. With the promulgation of the Indian Naval Discipline Act of 1934, the inauguration of the Royal Indian Navy at Bombay, both Indians and Britishers were recruited in the service. Here, the name changes from Royal Indian Marine to Royal Indian Navy. The recruitment in the Royal Indian Navy was more codified. The new personnel were to undergo a lot of training in gunnery, minesweeping operations, in harbour defence and seamanship. Generally, the Royal Navy was responsible for the overall maritime defence of India before the Second World War. However, outbreak of the unforeseen Second World War forced the British government to expand the Royal Indian Navy in haste again. And this was to protect the colonial interests in the Indian Ocean region. Moreover, the British followed a massive expansionist policy during the war, and by the end of it, manpower, establishment, and ships increased to almost 15 times to that of the pre-war situation. The Defence of India Act of 1939 was promulgated, and this established martial law in India. It was the Viceroy of India, Lord Linlithgow, who declared India's participation in the Second World War without consulting the Indian political leaders. Now, this move was initially met with a lot of opposition, and hence the August offer was proposed by the Viceroy. According to this August offer, India was to get a dominion status. Indian representation was promised at the Viceroy's Executive Council and in the War Advisory Council as well. This momentarily pacified the leaders, but subsequently it failed. Now, while there was a lot brewing in India due to the Indian independence movement, on global platform there was significant action happening as well. Now, one of the reasons for Second World War was the failure of the League of Nations. Now, and with the outbreak of the Second World War, a new organization was formed, which was the United Nations. How many of us know this gentleman on the left? Can I have a show of hands? If you know, not Pandit Nehru, the other one. It is Sir Girija Shankar Bajpai, who was the Agent General of India, who signed the declaration in the year 1942. India, along with the representatives of 26 nations who were at war with the Axis power, met in Washington to sign the Declaration of the United Nations. And this endorsed the Atlantic Charter, pledging to use all of their resources together and against the Axis powers, and agreeing not to make separate peace. And remember, this is pre-independence. So 1942, India had already signed the first charter. Coming back, the signature here, which is encircled in red, that is the signature of Sir Girija Shankar Bajpai, which was found in the archival documents. Coming back to the Second World War, as I said, the recruitment was haphazardly done. There was mass recruitment in the mobilization of Indian troops. Many of them were recruited from the hinterland, Punjab showing highest 25.5% of recruitment rate. The Royal Indian Navy undertook combat duties and rendered commendable service in this global theatre of action. It was also in the Middle East, the Gulf of the Red Sea operations. Its vessels operated in the European waters too, both in the Mediterranean and in the Atlantic. And this was truly a global war. These are some of the images of Indians in action during the Second World War. We see Indian troops at Arakan Front, which was the Burma campaign. Some of the, on the left, top left, we can see the Indian troops in North Africa and some Indian women who were trying to train, who were getting trained in India for the air raid precautions. The Royal Indian Navy carried out a range of duties which included convoy escort work, minesweeping operations, anti-submarine patrol, and mobilization of troops. The list went on. Along with the coastal defense, transportation of troops, the wind personnel carried non-operational duties such as laying of submarine and telegraph cables, and this was to keep the Arabian or the Indian Ocean waters safe. The upkeep of lighthouse, because port infrastructure facilities were also to be maintained, and also they also undertook hydrographic surveys. During the course of the war, there was major upgrade in the fleet and in the infrastructural facilities in the Royal Indian Navy. The first Bassett-class trawlers, HMIS Travancore, was fitted at Calcutta and commissioned into the Royal Indian Navy in the year 1941. The first Bangor-class minesweeper built in India joined the Royal Indian Navy in 1943. Later, 6 sloops built at UK like Jamna, Satluj, Kaveri, Krishna, Godavari and Narmada also joined the Royal Indian Navy to join the fleet. With the Japanese invasion of Singapore in the year 1942, threat in the Indian waters became even more imminent and prominent, and therefore it was important to protect the Indian shores. The security and patrolling were increased. This also led to the induction of women in uniformed services in India. The Women's Auxiliary Corps India was established in the year 1942, which later also gave rise to the Women's Royal Indian Naval Service in the year 1944. Women who were educated and who could understand and speak English were recruited and trained to take up shore jobs. This in turn allowed the men to take active combat duties. World War served as a catalyst in breaking patriarchal norms as Indian women gave a good response and enlisted in the services. They worked as decoders, cipher operators, and rendered secretarial assistance working in war offices. I find it interesting to note the nature of advertisements during this period. A promise of pay, other perks, appealing to the nationalist sensibilities was very much evident, which is written in the advertisements. Moreover, these recruitment of the advertisements, it is interesting to note that it went on till June 1945, just 2 months before the end of hostilities, because the World War ended with the nuclear bombing of Hiroshima and Nagasaki in August 1945. So I think it is impeccable timing where the advertisements have stopped, at least in June 1945. And on the other hand, while all this was going, the Quit India movement in India had also garnered momentum. The Bengal famine in 1943 added to the misery of the Indian subjects. For a country that was under colonial rule and it was struggling to feed its own people, India provided an astounding amount of financial aid to the British war effort. While Indian historiography has always credited Quit India movement diplomat, part of the War Advisory Council of the Viceroy of India. This is the Indian delegation led by Mrs. Vijayalakshmi Pandit in the years 1946 to 1948. Now, all this is happening pre-independence, right? So, post-independence, it was India's relation with the United Nations was further cemented when she became the 8th president of the United Nations General Assembly and the first ever woman to do so in the year 1953. So on the right is the photograph of 15th August 1947 when the Indian tricolor was hoisted at the Indian UN office as India attained independence. Coming to conclusion, I have a very short clip from the victory parade at Delhi in the year 1946.
All the peoples of India to their valiant sons who fought and fell on the great battlefields of the Second World War. General Lockheed Lake leads the mechanized column in an armored car. Another great victor of the Far East was also present, Admiral Mountbatten, the leader of Southeast Asia Command. Every unit of India's war machine took part, and here are the camel detachments, guardians of distant frontiers. From the hills of North Burma and Assam came the fierce Naga tribesmen. Never in history have the high qualities of India's people shone so brightly before the world. May the present negotiations hold a bright and prosperous future for the nation which helped so valiantly to bring victory and peace.
It just shows that Indian contribution to the World War efforts were acknowledged, but I think eventually it just got lost from our psyche due to the partition, due to the Indian independence. But was this end of war, the 1945 victory parade, was to commemorate the win or the victory of the Allied forces against the Axis powers, right? So after the end of the war, after the end of hostilities, was this a happy ending? Here we see 3 of the Victory Cross recipients who got the cross at the investiture at Buckingham Palace. But was this a happy ending? End of war? As I'd spoken earlier about the advertisements or the recruitment, it went till June 1945, or someone must have, we'll have to check even if it went beyond June 1945. But the end of hostilities called for a rapid demobilization of troops, which were recruited in the times of crisis. The picture down below is from a newspaper article from September 1948. The precise date is 28 September 1945, I'm sorry. It is about a month after the war, which was declared that 10,000 personnel will be discharged from the service. The right here was a major cause of resentment. This right here was the major cause of resentment amongst Indians. There existed racial discrimination, pay disparity, service grievances, and these were some of the major causes of concern which ultimately led to the Royal Indian Naval Uprising of 1946. And with this, I conclude and hope that the stage is set for our esteemed speaker. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Janvi, and kudos on sticking to the time perfectly now. That was a large canvas that you covered for the audience and just set the tone for the next speaker who was in our case now.
Thank you very much, Chair, Captain Durai Babu, Admiral S.J. Singh, FOCNC West, Admiral Shekhawat, former Chief of Naval Staff, flag officers, commanding officers, officer in charges, directors, Commodore Ashish Khanna, the Director of Maritime History Society, Commander Vadhera, the President of Navy Foundation Mumbai Chapter, Janvi, my fellow panelists, members of the media, veterans, officers, sailors, ladies, gentlemen. Thank you. Very, very good morning to you all. Today, to my mind, is a very significant day, 18th February. But it should be significant to all of us. मैं समझता हूँ कि आज का दिन बहुत महत्वपूर्ण है, पर क्या हम सबके लिए है? हम मानते हैं 13th April, जलियांवाला बाग. We all observe it as a day of mourning when so many people died. 23rd of March, when Bhagat Singh, Sukhdev and Rajguru were hanged, we mourn that as the National Martyrs' Day, in some senses, the Revolutionaries' Day. But what about 18th February? What about this week of 18th to 23rd February, when the naval uprising happened and the total number of people killed in Mumbai alone, little difference from what Captain Durai has given, there were about 400 who died in Bombay, 400 civilians, 1,500 injured, and still these are supposed to be the official figures, which means the unofficial figures are much higher. Now please see that these figures are the same as for Jallianwala Bagh. Right? So why is it that we observe, commemorate one day, but we don't even know about the other day? If I asked you that did you learn about the naval uprising in your history books, I'm sure you would say no, I didn't learn it at all. In fact, I didn't know about it for a long time after I joined the Navy. Why is it that something that happened close to us, in the very places that we inhabit, something that's cut so immediately to the bone, is something that has been forgotten and now is kind of getting a revival? So that, ladies and gentlemen, is going to be what I'm going to be talking about today. So, time constraints are there, so I'm thankful to Janvi for giving me an additional couple of minutes. So let me begin, as she did, with 2 or 3 questions to interest you. Suppose I were to put it to you that 3 different entities, the paper mill in Nepanagar in Madhya Pradesh, India Today Group, and James Bond, all are related in some way to the naval uprising. Would you be interested? Perhaps yes. Instead of asking you as a quiz question, let me give you the answers, because as I said, time is less. The paper mill in Nepanagar, Madhya Pradesh was begun by a gentleman called P.M. Nair, Panu Nair, who was a man of many parts, as I shall describe later, but one of the key persons involved in the naval uprising or the naval mutiny. He was a civilian, ex-army man, very checkered life. This was started by him after the naval uprising. Of course, the government of India took it later. It's a public sector undertaking, and today, by a strange set of circumstances, there's a naval officer, Commodore Saurabh Dev, sitting as the chairman and managing director of that place. The India Today Group, one of the key leaders, ring leaders of the uprising, though he had left before the uprising happened, was a gentleman called R.D. Rishidev Puri. Rishidev Puri is the uncle of Arun Puri, the founder and the CEO and the chairman, whatever, of the India Today Group. And most interesting is James Bond, the CNC Royal Indian Navy, Admiral Godfrey. Admiral Godfrey, who did not cover himself with glory alas in handling the uprising, had an assistant in London, Foster's son, as he called himself, whose name was Ian Fleming, who created James Bond. And Ian Fleming made the character of M resemble Admiral Godfrey. So these, ladies and gentlemen, are, if like ants you chase breadcrumbs, you start to connect the dots of history. And some of those attempts will be made today. Janvi brought out very well what is the Royal Indian Navy. 16 years of existence, checkered existence, saw a lot, increased several fold during the war, conducted itself And this has in some way resonance to the naval uprising, which is why I have brought it out here. So it took part in war, did well, as we brought out. This is what the CNC Royal Indian Navy, Fitzherbert, says. He says, their behavior had accorded with the highest traditions of imperial navy. They fought in all the theatres, they did, and the Royal Indian Navy in World War II is a subject very much worth studying and reading. The MHS has a couple of books on that. Please read about that. Okay? But this was a small service set up for coastal defense, doing very well in World War II. So what happens? Immediately at the end of the war, you have, as we say, a complicated situation. Now, one of the things that you must see in continuation from what Janvi said, from about World War I and before, there is a continuous thread from there. The two world wars, we are providing this volunteer force. In World War II, the largest volunteer force. We get membership of the League of Nations and the United Nations. What is happening in parallel? Jallianwala Bagh is happening, Ramlek Act is happening, non-cooperation movement is happening, civil disobedience movement is happening, Quit India is happening. But there is a third thread in all this, and that third thread is a continuous quest by national leaders. Please see how far thinking they were to have Indian leadership in the higher echelons. So right from the earliest times, our national leaders say, please have Indians in higher echelons of the armed forces. Which is why in 1922 you have the RIMC set up. In 1929 and 27, Dufferin starts functioning. 1932, the IMA starts. In fact, one of the demands, I think of 1930, the Roundtable Conference, gets exceeded too, is about Indian leadership. She also mentioned about the Royal Indian Marine. Now, Royal Indian Marine became a combatant in November 1929. But it did not become Royal Indian Navy till 34 because the motion to make it the Royal Indian Navy failed by one vote. And it failed because Indian leaders in the Central Legislative Assembly said, you must consult us and have more Indian leadership. Which is why it stayed for 5 years. If you see some old records and caps, incidentally, we started flying the white ensign in 1929, and certain old records and caps start referring to the ships as HM, not RIM ships, but HM ships from 1929. So it tells you a little bit about how Indianization is happening, but not enough. And at the end of World War II, as she asked, is it a happy situation? Certainly not, because at least as far as the men in Talwar, HMIS Talwar, the present day empty pool, are concerned, there are 20,000 people, and after being given lots of promises, they are told, now you can no longer serve. You are being demobilized. And in the nature of good bureaucracy, a monthly report has to be given on demobilization. Right? So this is what is the state in Talwar. And to add to that, unsatisfactory living condition, rude, racist behavior, everything she has brought out. So there is on one side an internal situation and there is an external volatile political situation. So that bubbles up over, and on the 1st of December, which was when the Navy Day used to be observed then there is this brooms and buckets that go up. Happens again on the 1st and 2nd of February. Commander King, a man with strong reputation, is put. He behaves badly, he calls people as coolies, suar ke bache, all that, and that then completely blows over. So as Admiral Satinder Singh says, this is what was happening there in Talwar. Now please see supercharged political atmosphere. I have emphasized this because I am going to come back to this later in terms of addressing how it transformed from being a mutiny into an uprising. So basically what happened, ladies and gentlemen, I am aware that many of you know what happened and are probably seeking a bit more depth, but probably there are a lot of people here who may not have known what happened, so I am giving a quick run-up on that too. So basically, before dawn on February 18, HMIS Talwar So as we these days say, it went viral. It went viral also because Talwar was the signal school of Navy those days, and the wireless transmitters and everything, there was also proper ComSyn sort of a place. Of course, the main ComSyn was still where it is existing, okay, but they used the communication means to get in touch with everyone. And in those days, I suppose even now, communication sailors were smarter than the rest. So they had actually, they were in a higher pay grade, and they quickly utilized that to sort of spread the message around. And it went all over. So all across establishment, Bombay, Karachi, Visakhapatnam, Madras, Kochi, Jamnagar, you see that. They formed what is called the Indian National Navy. They described themselves as Azad Hindis. On the ships, they were taken over. The Royal Indian Navy sign was brought down. A combination flag of Congress, Muslim League, and the Communists were hoisted. Sit-down strikes. Gates were trained. I'm not going into the whole thing. You're going to watch a very, very interesting movie at the end of it, which will give you what happened. And most importantly, look how clever they were. They took over Butcher Island, which was the ammunition depot of the force at that time. Now, ladies and gentlemen, it didn't stop with the Navy. And that is the reason I actually describe it as an uprising. One spark led to a fire. And it simply spread over to a whole lot of places in India, Calcutta, Ahmedabad, Madras, Vizag, but importantly in Bombay, it took on the shape of a proper unrest. This was civil disobedience movement, port workers, dockyard workers, mill hands, railways, student unions, everybody. Public transport got shut. There was a Hartal revolt in Bombay on the 22nd and Karachi on the 22nd and 23rd. Now this, look at that. Bombay alone, 400 dead, 1,500 injured. Pitched battles and troops. And where? Gateway, Fort, JJ Hospital, Gurbam, Vileshwar, Sanders Bridge, Pier Road, Albi Road, Gompa Devi, Dadar, Shivaji Park, Koilur Mill Compound, Mahim, Beti Bazar, I mean, everything that you call South and Central. In addition, North Mumbai too. There was an ASC called Kurla, there was HMI Sakbar in Thane, there was, I think, one establishment in Andheri. There was, of course, Amla was involved too, so it spread to North Mumbai. One of the reports that comes from KEM hospital says, grim, bodies are being brought, bloodshed is happening, all operations theaters, banks, government shops. So basically, ladies and gentlemen, the city made common cause with the ratings. Now, HMI's Hindustan in Karachi equally, Karachi smaller, 2,000 rating. There, the authorities cut down the main bridge linking Karachi with the port, so the ratings were cloistered there, but they fought a pitched battle again. Chamak, Bahadur, Himalaya, the establishments there, all of them came into play, but most importantly, this ship fought a gun battle. It was the army there, the Gurkhas and the Baluchis were asked to fire on the ship. She was at anchorage, they refused, and the Scottish rifles, I think, or the Welsh rifles came in, and they were to fire. So the 4-inch guns of Hindustan fired against from anchorage. So there was actual pitched battle that went down in Karachi. It did in Bombay too, incidentally. The parapets of Angre, the soldiers of the Marathas were asked to lay a siege on Castle Barracks in Angre. And sailors took up position on the top of the parapet. If you walk across the castle, you'll actually see it. Okay. The Marathas refused to fire. Again, the British troops were called, and there was exchange of fire between the army troops and the navy ratings. So what did these people want? One, of course, they said, please finish with the demobilization, take action against Commander King, other aspects of work environment. But look at what they went beyond. Release the INA leaders. Impartial inquiry against all atrocities. Withdrawal of our troops from Indonesia and Middle East. What did the naval ratings have to do with troops from Middle East and Indonesia? Supervision by Indian officers and need more Indian officers. 20 years after independence. Okay? So if there had not been push from India, the Englishmen would never have agreed to rapid Indianization because they knew what would be the possibilities of that. And despite all this non-violent, courteous behavior, what was the British response? Completely unprecedented, completely disproportionate, showing that they were rattled. Massive use of force, arrested, summoned ships from Trincomalee, the East Indies Force headquarters, Royal Navy ships, there were some Royal Navy ships, not the Royal Indian Navy ships, there were some Royal Navy ships, they were asked to be at standby. British troops were called, siege on castle barracks. Now look at that. The actual deaths in Mumbai and Karachi, this is again the official figure, many people put the death in Karachi at about 60. Okay. The actual official figure, even if you went, or figures of the Navy people who perished or were injured was in the region of 100. But the city of Bombay alone had about probably 400. And Godfrey, Admiral Godfrey, the Cochrane, he said, we will destroy this Royal Indian Navy if we have to, if you don't surrender. And that sent shockwaves actually amongst lots of people. His statement earned lots of condemnation. You know. So then, ultimately what therefore happened, the uprising, unfortunately, for all the popular support it had, did not get the political support. Congress and Muslim League, the two main parties, distanced themselves from it. Sardar Patel asked the ratings to surrender. There were a few Congress leaders, Sarandar Asaf Ali, Minu Musani, who were supportive of the uprising leaders, but by and large, the two political parties. And unlike Netaji's INA, mind you, the INA tracks greatly inspired the naval ratings. General Shah Nawaz Khan of the INA actually pledged his support to the naval ratings. But that's a different thing. Basically, it was seen as a one-off episode. Also, as Srinath Raghavan says, a very well-known young historian, now that independence and power were in sight, they were eager not to upgrade. You know? So, basically, the suggestion is that the Congress and British Muslim League, having struggled for long, now that the goal of freedom is there, they thought it will get jeopardized. Some people, other people have said they should have supported, whether they did not do it, whatever reasons, we can discuss that during the Q&A. So basically, on the 23rd of March, they surrendered. Actually, most of them surrendered in some ways, it happened on 22nd. But the entire evening of that surrender, please read in that book called The Last War of Independence by Pramod Kapoor. Outstanding book, if I would recommend. Please buy that one book today. Fantastic research, and it reads like a thriller absolutely. So what is the aftermath? And again, this is interesting. These guys are sent to Mulund and Thane, interned there. And another reason I say it's an uprising and not mutiny is because they carried out their struggle there for a while. 400 of them. Again, the ringleaders were moved from Mulund to Thane. In fact, 2 weeks back, Mayor Marfakia, who writes in the Midday, had written a small column saying unity, not mutiny, talking to the camp at Mulund. No? But they were treated badly, given one-way ticket and told never to return. So as it petered down, they were simply sent home, and they were actually fettered. If you come back, we do not know what will happen to you. And then over the next 60, 70 years, they were forgotten, traded every notion. In fact, those who were dismissed with disgrace were told to give money for the kit that was missing. Okay? Penniless. And now compare this with the advertisements that was made to them when they were joining. You will be this one, you will get officer commission, if you do well, you will be rich, you will be this, you will be that. You know that Janvi showed two posters, one of them with that soldier against the background of a red, this one in India. That translated says, this soldier is defending Hindustan and his family. Join the Indian army if you want Chobani in Talwar, some different Balwant Singh, relative of Admiral Radhakrishnan, okay, Lieutenant Y.N. Singh, they took part in the uprising in different ways. So this, ladies and gentlemen, at the halfway stage of my talk, now I'm going to argue, having given you the background, why I consider it more than a mutiny, and I think it is the last war of independence. I would categorically call it the last war of independence, as many people have said. Why? For various reasons. There were 9 mutinies between 42 and 45. All of them hidden, all of them this one. They were localized to certain conditions. They did so. This one had widespread response within and outside. As the Commission of Inquiry report itself, the Commission of Inquiry report, if you read it, copies are available with the images. It tries to, given the spirit of that time, even though it's headed by Justice Personally, it has lots of people, it tries to sort of play around so much with words and tries to show it's a beauty. Even that is not able to, gloss over the fact or forget the fact about the widespread nature and rapidity. Now this doesn't happen usually. It goes beyond that. The widespread nature and rapidity. Men of all communities took part, different parts of India. Disproportionate response of the British. They were rapid. At the same time, and this is interesting, not many people have brought this up except for Pramod. On the 18th of March, the uprising happens, and the 19th of March, the British announced the cabinet mission, headed by Stafford Cripps. One of the members there, Mr. Alexander, is the first Lord of the Admiralty. So it is Pramod's surmise that the cabinet mission was actually announced. Maybe they had it in their mind as a response to this. And if so, then of course, it stands even more to reason that this was actually what fetched you independence. More, very, very important is the political thoughts and nature of demands, and I'll come to that in a bit. But what were the nature of the demands I've told you? What were the slogans? Quit India, Inqilab Zindabad, Gandhi, Nehru are heroes, English dogs go away. None of their slogans were about, their immediate localized conditions. So I'm suggesting to you, ladies and gentlemen, this aspect of looking at it as a mutiny was a bit, it had aspects, what is called the immediate cause. But it is like saying that just as the first war of independence of 1857, described by the British as the Sepoy Mutiny, because the grease cartridges were used, that was some local disaffection. No, it was not. The local disaffection only produced the spark. There was a huge cauldron before that. And moral aspects, being non-violent, being courteous, a whole lot of what they did. The Satyagraha approach, civil disobedience approach, during the Q&A, I'd like to read from one of those chapters. There are a little bit, one or two paragraphs. You will be amazed at how the ratings thought of a Gandhian way of struggle. This stirs continued, ladies and gentlemen. They continued for several days until the middle of March. In Karachi they continued, in Bombay they continued, as I said, in Mulund, in Thane. In fact, in the camp in Mulund, they had a flag hoisting with the rods of their beds. Okay? They pulled down the British flag again. They had a flag hoisting with the rods of their bed. And when the camp commandant told them that you can't do this, they said only on one condition, you will salute this flag when it is hoisted down, and only then you can put back the RIF flag. Of course, we also got to look at the eventual outcome. This happens in February 46. Originally, the British is thinking of giving you some sort of independence and dominion status in 48. You know from Mountbatten's papers, but everything is now cast of characters and Navy's touch, again, I'd like to talk about. But look at this. Surrender, but G.D. Sharma has written a small book on the naval uprising. Father of Commander Vipin Sharma. G.D. Sharma was a lieutenant commander in the Indian Navy. He spent some time in the Int, and where he came upon lots of papers talking of what the. So the Int summaries, G.D. Sharma quotes them. And he sees how all the armed forces are going through the stages of disaffection. In fact, even when G.D. Sharma is no more, we are helping the family bring out a new version of the book where he talks of the naval uprising along with the other two uprisings. I'm doing a bit of self-advertising here. When that book comes out over the next 6 months, please buy that. Okay? But look at what the surrender statement says. Historic event in the life of nation. In fact, Pramod Kapoor says that the whole surrender statement must be preserved as a precious historical document of Indian history. We in the services will never forget this. For the first time, the blood of the men in the services and people flowed together in a common cause. As we said, they had public support but no political support. We see that one of the ringleaders who actually was dismissed a little before the uprising, but he stayed on to see the uprising. He had not left because as he was leaving, the uprising happened. Says, the means did not matter to some of us. He was of the more revolutionary mind. The leadership would not have it, they nipped the young thought. And later on, writing few years later, we see that says, out of the Royal Indian Navy came National Navy. Now, of course, he's being triumphal about himself. There's no doubt. You can give a little bit of margin to that. Okay? But he says when the country was lying prostrate in the feet of God. So what I'm trying to suggest is these guys were not imbued with narrow thoughts, ration chahiye, pani chahiye, khana chahiye. It was much more than that. Okay? What were the other contemporary events? Okay? Revolt in the Indian Army at the same time. So, at this time, two pioneer companies in Calcutta revolted, put down very harshly persons. The Royal Air Force, the Royal Indian Air Force. In fact, just a few days after the uprising in Jabalpur, the Indian Army Corps of Signals, revolted. Please read General B.K. Singh, one of our very great army historians, has written about this. Clement Attlee, the Prime Minister of Britain during the uprising, when he visited India in 1956, he said the hurried departure happened because of the INA naval uprising. And specifically when he was asked for the impact of Quit India movement, he said it was minimal. Now, ladies and gentlemen, I'm not suggesting it may have been so. This is what Clement Attlee said. Clement Attlee may have had reasons to disparage Mahatma Gandhi. But please see the needle changing effect. It is my humble suggestion to you all that along with the non-violent movement that led to Quit India and other things, a whole lot of revolutionary movements, aggressive movements, were the other vectors that brought us freedom. What did others do? Panditji said, opened a new chapter in the history of our armed forces. Admiral Katari, no great fan of the uprising, says the Indian component of the Navy shared the revulsion for the British. So this is just after World War II, right? Who fought, who did everything. But who is responsible for this? It's the British, not the Indians. They did what they had to do. Or again, Srinath Raghavan, the single most important event in convincing the British government that it was no longer World War II. What does G.D. Sharma say again? He says it needs to be, and G.D. Sharma is important, I'm saying, ladies and gentlemen, because when this happened, after this happened, he was in the intelligence bureau. And he spent time, I'm not talking about during the uprising, many years later, where he came upon many fights of the uprising. He said the mutiny paved the path of Purna Swaraj. That must be remembered as the last one. Meenu Masani says, partly by nationalistic motives. What response to commemorating it, to celebrating it, to embracing it. From a literary viewpoint, what Salman Rushdie says in his book The Moor's Last Sigh, when Mumbai, the super epic motion picture of a city transformed overnight into a motionless tableau by great naval and land level strikes, when ships did not sail, steel was not built, textile mills neither walked nor moved, she set about creating history in Chaco, stopping the protagonist, stopping what his mother was painting. What do the British say? Commander Good, a person who spent lots of time, very well reputed RIN officer, in a book called Bombay for 10 years, he says, strong external political influence. Lack of contact between senior officers. Who are the senior officers? The British. But he brings out a very, very interesting thing. He says, Acha hua, uprising hua, because he's being very, very diplomatic in that article. The entire lovely article about his stay in the RIN. Okay. He says, because now it was decided that independence would come, it brought an end to anti-British feeling, and when we ultimately left in 47, we could do so with good feelings towards each other. In other words, he's admitting that one of the outcomes of the uprising was a decision to now leave India, the Indian Navy, and everything to the Indians. Lord Sorensen, a Labour MP from Britain, what does he say? To British it was mutiny, but to Indians it would certainly be different. To Indians who sought liberation, it could be as much patriotic resentment as it was in the minds of Ulstermen in Northern Ireland, as is the mind of French fighting the Nazis. One man's mutiny is another man's loyalty. And he had just come on a delegation visit a few days before the uprising. What do the officials say? The Viceroy, Lord Wavell, last 3 months have been anxious and depressing. It's the story of misfortune and of folly. Of course, you bet it is. Weekly in sum, 25th February. If we have to rule India for a long time, we have to keep the permanent British Army. We have no such army. In other words, ladies and gentlemen, the day the British realized that they could no longer command the loyalty of the coercive elements of the state, the armed forces, it was game up for them. Which is why naval uprising is very, very important. Now a lot of people, subsequently, one reason for this ambiguity is because they say, you are romanticizing mutiny. It's not so. There's a fundamental difference. And what is this fundamental difference between what you do for with the other power and your own is like this. What Minu Masani says, I ask you to leave when there's still an army, navy and air force, in his speech in the Central Legislative Assembly on 26. He says, when was the British government lawfully established? Aap bolte ho by procedure lawfully established. Complete basis of the British government is unlawful. Aruna Asafali, the firebrand, she's asked in an interview in mid-80s, do remember that Under Two Ensigns came out in 85. So you had a long, almost 40-year gap after the uprising. So when Satinder Singh wrote, he wrote it with great degree of calmness. It was not an instinctive thing, he said. And he quotes what Aruna Asafali says. In our present situation, people who have sworn allegiance to the Indian Constitution. So it must be very, very clear that the naval uprisings revolted against the British. It does not mean that today we are saying that we are glamorizing a mutiny. Not at all. This was freedom struggle, and just as lot of elements of freedom struggle, whether it was civil disobedience movement, whether what happened in the First War of Independence, when you become independent, you accept, you celebrate, but you no longer think it is kosher for an independent India. That is the way you deal with it. What does Panditji say? Referring to Claude Auchinleck comments. He says, this will apply only to a free country. Remember, these are the legal principles, which is why I always say, Junagadh is the key. Ladies and gentlemen, Junagadh is the key, and this is a very, very important one. Why is Junagadh the key? Exercise peace, coercive operation. What is Satendra Singh saying? It was the first time, he says, first action of independent India said, first time in centuries that the Navy did not function as an adjunct of the Royal Navy or on the dictates of Whitehall, but as a newly independent country's nascent sea arm, at the orders of representatives of the people of India. Representatives of people of India. Very, very important. So what happened then was an uprising. It doesn't mean we are saying that that is good. And take the case of the first ever court-martial of independent Indian Navy, Junagadh again. Patrick John Mugabe, ML 420. There's an interesting side story about ML 420. I hope someone asks about it in the question and answer session. But he was court-martialed. The prosecutor was Commodore Knott. Commodore Knott sought a death sentence. Commodore Knott was loaned from the Royal Navy to the Royal Indian Navy. Because this guy chickened out of the operation. He did sail out of the Motor Launch 420. There were 3 charges. One that he didn't behave in conduct becoming of an officer. The second is he contrived to delay the sailing. Third most important, willful disobedience. Now nobody sheds tears for Mugabe. Everyone knows. Nobody asked for his rehabilitation. So what happens in independent India? Yes, correct. He ought to have been punished. But what happened before 47 was under an alien government. And any act of resistance to alien government ought to be seen in the correct light. Look at how the Brits, right? This reminds you in some ways of the French Revolution, the Bourbons. Okay? 2nd of March, Glasgow. Glasgow is coming from Trincomalee. Said she's coming, I think, one day, 23rd, one day after the surrender of this. So, show of strength. So it's all finished, and then the Free Press Journal has this little thing. Munshis at cocktail party celebrate end of RIN strike. Why is the RIN celebrating the end of strike? And as Pramod says, invited guests were taken over, regaled with wartime stories, roaring party. This was barely a week after the massacre of hundreds of civilians. To many Indians, it seemed like a shameful episode. So, that's 5 minutes, 45. I'm finished. I'm happy. Fascinating cast of characters. Another reason why I'm telling you this is all of these, ladies and gentlemen, all the sailors who were the ringleaders, we see that, what happens? After the uprising, he goes out, he joins a Free Press Journal, okay, as a journalist. He shares cabin with Pal Thackeray, right? He works there for 3 years. Joins Lintas, advertising firm. Shares space with Shyam Benegal. He writes The Mutiny of Innocence. He's an author. He likes a good life, okay? He's a fitness freak, yoga. Ends looking after the Yusuf Mehrabi Center in Panvel, a socialist by nature, married to Ansuya Dutt, one of the most fiery lawyers, feminist lawyers of India. Right? There's MS Khan, and I must tell you, one guy who has disappeared from the books, the most important guy. Look at his knowledge of Satyagraha, Gandhi, disobedience. You can't read that. I propose to read some of that during the Q&A if I get a chance. The chapter 4 of Nationalism and Non-Violence. Fantastic guy. Madan Singh, the anti-surrender guy. The BC Dutt and Madan Singh, the 2 guys after whom the after them. He also joins a Free Press Journal. Father says you're good for nothing, comes back. Then later does lots of things. Studies avionics. Goes to British Overseas Airways Corporation. Heads their operations in Ghana. A man fond of music. Mozart. Beethoven. The book of gastronomy, okay? He is reading that, he is fond of cooking. He joins up with Biju Patnaik for Kalinga Airways. These are great characters. You don't expect politician in Pakistan. Rishi Devpuri, I've talked to you, goes abroad, sets up a restaurant, joins film business in UK, looks after the Davy Coast restaurant in Shimla, marries a French woman, comes back to India, sets up a film production company, has talk sessions with Pandit Nehru. Vishwanath Bose, another author, has written a book on the Uprising. Kusum Nair, these are the two civilians where most of this discussion is being done in Rivera building. The operational planning for the Uprising is done in Rivera, where Kusum and P.N. Nair stay. Kusum is one of the world's most well-known experts on rural development economics. She has written books, she was visiting faculty in Harvard later, friends of Nobel Prize winners in economics. So you're talking of, I've told you about P.N. Nair already. Okay, look at Madan Singh. I do not hate the British, but I cannot claim I'm in love with them. Or when Patel tells him, look at these tanks, you will get us killed, he says, I will not worry about that, because they have the army and tanks, but we have the ammunition. Right? So these are all interesting multi-hued lives, and I'm coming to my last 2 or 3 minutes. The Indian Navy's healing touch, ladies and gentlemen. I told you about how Karmarkar, Nanda, Kobi, Karmarkar was involved briefly as a CEO, he's staying in Rivera. They were exposed. Most of our our leadership, post-independence leadership were exposed. They brought in the healing touch, as Admiral Qatari said. We now have to get to the purposeful pursuit of reconstructing a disciplined Navy again. Good and compassionate Navy. This compassionate leadership. There's 4 men in the Navy, I'll talk about it, but as Commodore Nott says, at that camp in Mulund, he says, हमको हिंदुस्तान से जाना मांगता है, लेकिन हमको इजाजत नहीं है. He is torn between his ways. And still the ratings tell him, तुमको किसने रोका है? I'll come to that Avanti story and 4 men and this one. I'll just flash these things. 71 we recognize them as freedom fighters, 96 characterized as Uprising, 2 yardcraft named after Dutt and Madan Singh. Okay, Uprising Memorial, seminars and events and MHS does. So there has been the Navy, it has been doing a lot of good work. This is BC Dutt being honored. This son, BC Dutt is the old man who's sitting next to Admiral Verma. BC Dutt and his son Tanuj, they are also meeting Admiral Prithvi Shah. There's a yardcraft named after Madan Singh, that's Madan Singh. So we are honoring the innocents. The innocents reference is to the Mutiny of Innocents written by Balai Dutt. This is those who took part and they've been given a cash check. This is Navy Day 2002 and poetic justice. Do remember Navy Day 1945, the first spark is lit, and several years later, the wheel of destiny. So I see that guy with a wheel of destiny, not maybe the naval wheel. Okay. So I think that February 1946 must be seen for its seminal importance. We should embrace, celebrate it. It is as important as our role in World Wars, and Navy gets a stakeholdership in saying we took part in the freedom struggle. There are multiple views, I respect that, but we need to see these inspirational stories in context. We need much more studies, more research on all these characters, people. We need to find out new ways of celebration and commemoration. I have some ideas, we can discuss that during the Q&A. So we must see it for merits, eliminate biases, and see history for what it is. Ladies and gentlemen, as an academic, you will see history for what it is. The conclusion of the Board of Inquiry report said, we will see a gradual nationalization of officers' cadre. Right? First requirement is that the Navy must have confidence in itself. Right? And we will take every step. Navy Day of 1949 saw Bing Crosby, Burt Lancaster, and Bob Pope celebrating the Navy Day and sending messages of greetings. But the most important to my mind is on the 75th year of your independence, if you are able to send Tarangini to London and remind the Britishers that you guys came sailing to our shores in 1612, now we come sailing to your shores. I think that's the most emphatic statement. So to fire at the RBYC and all that. You know? And then there is Y.N. Singh in Port Blair, who is taking part in the uprising. Now, immediately after independence, ladies and gentlemen, these four guys, Commodore North, Agar Chatterjee, Krishnan and Y.N. Singh, sit together in naval headquarters and bring out the Navy's plans. Commodore North perishes in an air accident in early 1948. These three gentlemen, who are in different geographical places, who respond to the uprising differently, now come together to create the new Navy. So that, I think, holds a message for us. And Admiral Avanti, who was in UK, he told me this incident that they were called by the superintendent there, told about this mutiny uprising and said, Manohar, look here, all good navies must have a mutiny before they become great. I think we must be thankful that this happened in the early years, it happened before independence, because I believe that the post-independence Indian Navy took the correct lessons, our leadership took the correct lessons, and the reason we are amongst the best navies in the world today, and I say it not triumphantly, but as a historian trying to decode our navy, it is because we took the correct lessons from this episode, so we must celebrate it, make it. Thank you very much. Thanks a lot for your
Thank you, sir, for a very captivating talk, taking the audience back in time of the event. Your views that the participants in the uprising were not merely protesting living conditions, but instilled with a larger patriotic fervor and enhanced political consciousness are well received. Sadly, post-independence popular understanding and narratives of this seminal moment have been uneven. I agree there is a need to evaluate the uprising as being among the many vectors that count towards bringing our freedom. During your talk, you mentioned HMS Hindustan and Glasgow. So that brings to my mind a small story among the many stories which happened in those few days. So there was this Bangor class minesweeper, HMS Kathiawar, about 250 tons of one gun, stationed at Port Morvi in Kathiawar, present-day Gujarat coast. And they received a message from HMS Hindustan, which was in Karachi, that we intend to fight, we need all the support. So 60 odd crew in this Kathiawar ship decide to take over the ship, put the British officers under lock and key, pair up them inside and say, we now command this ship. Reasonably, the first Indian command by Indian ratings, I guess. And they take over the ship and they say, we will sail to Karachi in aid of Hindustan. This was happening on 22nd of February. And as they are proceeding towards Karachi, they receive another signal from Hindustan saying, we have surrendered. We could not keep out the inevitable. We have surrendered. But then the fervor is so much on Kathiawar, they decide to turn around and head towards Bombay and join up the rest of the ship protesting there. As I brought out, Bombay was being patrolled, the entrances of Bombay was being patrolled by large cruisers, which was still run by the Britishers. HMS Glasgow was one of them. 16, 14 4-inch guns and about 5,500 tons. And there's this Kathiawar suddenly sailing. And a message goes from Glasgow to Kathiawar. Bring down your flags, lay down your weapons and surrender. Kathiawar in return points their single 12-pounder gun on Glasgow and says, we will fight to the end. It's written that the sailors of Glasgow all came onto the upper decks while their guns were pointing at Kathiawar and Kathiawar had its single gun pointing and the sailors holding their rifles and they saluted Kathiawar as it went past. That's another story. So now we come to our Q&A session. I invite the audience. Anybody with the questions?
Good morning. First and foremost, think I would have to thank this. I've been enjoying all the stories. Rather, I lived the uprising vicariously today, let me be honest. As a proud naval spouse, it's no surprise for me that the first war of independence was initiated by the army and the last war of independence by the navy. All the discussions today brought out, or rather brought out two key themes for me. One was moral injury, the willful disobedience that you talk of. And the second was, if I may say, willful segregation or ostracizing of this historical event. So I would want Commodore Kesnu to quickly share whether the young lieutenant who was court-martialed, was that a case of moral injury by Commodore Knott, the one that you spoke of? And second, regarding the political ostracizing of this historically significant event, do you think that this marked civilian control over the military? Was this willful or selective sidelining of this event a harbinger of civilian control over the military? Thank you very much.
Any other questions? You could join in a couple of questions and keep the questions crisp, short.
Jain sir, my name is Lieutenant Commander Shrikara. I'm from Headquarters Western Naval Command. So my query is, while we understand that the Royal Indian Navy Uprising had a larger nationalistic purview and not just a localized revolt, but do you think this is often also, this can also serve as a potential inspiration or cause for further divide, or rather, inspiring a divide between the current officer corps and the ratings? And probably that is the reason why we are slightly reluctant in commemorating it enough. Because even now when we look at it, we see more of the ratings being celebrated, and it might appear to a lot of people that enough officers are not inclined towards the revolt.
So you are looking at the officer's role in the uprising.
Glorifying it. Yeah, let me try and answer these two questions quickly. Insofar as what Meera said, no, Percy Mungovan was court-martialed for disobedience of orders, not getting his ship ready. Of course, there was some humorous comments later in a different context by Pakistani chief Zahir Shah. He's written a book called Bubbles of Water, when he says that India returned Hindustan to us, which was in no good shape. Bizarrely, Hindustan went to Pakistan, and 420 went to India. So this ML 420, commanded by Mungovan, he is court-martialed for chickening out, not sailing his ship to go into war. Okay, and that amounts to great disobedience, which is why Commodore Knott says he must be put to death. Of course, he's dismissed from the service, but that's as great a disobedience in an act of war. Coming to your question, civil-military relations, no, I don't think so. To the extent that things bear on civil-military relations in different way, they do. But all of these factors would count. India's civil-military relations history goes to what is called the Curzon-Kitchener, Pact, and what happens, I think, around 1904, 1905, when the CNC and the Viceroy have disagreements about how the defense of India is run, and subsequently that. So we can have a detailed discussion on the nature of civil-military relations in India and what is the trajectory it's taken. But the short answer is, I don't think as an academic, you look at evidence-based research. So there is no evidence to suggest that what happened during this time had a bearing on the subsequent trajectory of civil-military relations in our country. As to what the other officer has asked, no, I don't think so. And I think this is, Admiral Chauhan once rightly said that we in our Navy are fond of creating imaginary terrors and thereafter living in perpetual dread of them. So we create this huge amount of perpetual dreads which, please have confidence in your country. Please have confidence in an independent India. Please have confidence in maturity and temperament. Like I said, our own post-independent naval leadership showed great character, showed temperament, established the compass for a moral and compassionate leadership. In history, as in many subjects of humanities, you do a counterfactual. What if you had not done that? What if there was no uprising? Would there have been no uprisings or mutinies later? What if you had not discussed? Would that not have happened? It is like suggesting that because we celebrate 1857, because we celebrate the civil disobedience movement of the Mahatma Gandhi and everything that followed, or we celebrate the revolutionary movements of Bhagat Singh and Netaji and all that, and because some of them sided with those parties, we are giving a legitimacy to those sort of movements. No, everything depends on the context. In history you say that content is determined by context. So you have to see what is the context. I think we should get out of this fear that this in some ways is privileging mutiny or mutinous feelings in a post-independence India. No, which is why I brought in the legal principle and I brought in the Junagadh incident. Not at all. Any such conduct of a sovereign nation must be viewed with all seriousness. That does not mean you do not celebrate acts of resistance against the colonials. It's as simple as that. And to my mind, the naval uprising was a fantastic act of resistance in standing up to the colonials.
Questions? Yeah, one more here.
In Pramod Kapoor's book, he states that when the people of Bombay came to know that the sailors are striking because of poor food which could not be consumed, many of the people of Bombay came with food and kept it at Gateway of India. But the papers during that time for that 1-2 weeks do not speak of this act of Bombay. So, could I know where could the sources be for this?
The sources of information, yes, of course, you're right. Pramod Kapoor would say that. Lots of other pieces say that too. I said that Mumbai joined in a common cause. The citizens of Mumbai and people coming with food at the gateway. Because remember, those days you didn't have all the south breakwater, inner breakwater was small. Most ships used to be at anchorage. So sailors used to come to the gateway and they were greeted. They were sort of hailed as heroes. Where do you get information on all this? The archives of newspapers. The Times of India has an excellent archive, though the Times at that time, being a kind of colonial newspaper, reported things differently. The Free Press Journal, very patriotic, led by the great Sadanand, and their archives are not as meticulously maintained as that of the Times of India, but if you go and read and ask for chronologically based newspaper cuttings and newspaper coverage, you will get this. Which is why I said we need many more studies, we need many more researchers, we need more people coming to say, how did Bombay make common cause, what else they did. There is a lot of area in this which still needs a lot of writing, recreating. Why should there not be a board near Gateway saying that this is what happened? In Angre you have a small, at the entrance you have that you are passing through historic portals. The historicity is not limited to the fact that the British built the castle. It must also talk of what happened during the uprising, and it does, incidentally. So, we have to have this sense of historicity. Who would think that Rivera building, a pretty nondescript building, I stayed there for a year, incidentally, would have this historical character. So much of what we interpret depends on what is the information that comes, and there you are right. We need a lot more research and a lot more stuff out for the public.
Jim, I would just add on a little there. The director MHS himself had gone to Delhi to Sainik Samachar, defense magazine, which was started in 1909, and they came out with monthly, and now they're still going on. We were looking through the archives to find a mention of 46. Surprisingly, till 48, we hadn't found anything about 46, nothing in the magazine, a defense magazine. And the only first article that we saw was the speech by Admiral Godfrey, and he was a little scathing in his remarks. So there was an embargo on how much could be written, what could be written at that time.
Yeah. You can also look for reports or newspapers which are written in the vernacular languages like Marathi, Gujarati, because we often forget that these were also the newspapers which were widely writing about the press coverage was also happening. So Marathi and Gujarati newspapers also must be considered because they are the ones who are writing a lot from the labor perspective. So even that can be considered. Mumbai Samachar. Yes. Even if you have checked, Bombay Chronicle has a lot of in-depth coverage of the 1946 at personalized.
So somebody here was raising their hand, please.
Lieutenant Commander for Uttarakhand, retired young, still young and planning to remain young. I believe that the ratings were inspired and motivated by Gandhiji. And since this revolt was a non-violent revolt, why is it that Gandhiji did not support this revolt? Was there any particular reason? And because of this non-support, did the revolt end a little earlier than it should have?
Sir, highest regard for our great sailing champion and man of many parts. Very, very interesting. Even today, it's a bit of a riddle, bit of a puzzle. Why did the Mahatma not come out in support of the uprising? One, of course, he thought that this was going to be anarchic. One, he thought that it had no control. And most importantly, he thought it would degenerate into violence, which it probably did not. There is also a different way to look at it. The more, let's say, the more central, the more conservative elements within the Congress, Mahatma Gandhi, Sardar Patel, Morarji Desai, they were not too much in favor of the uprising because they thought that this probably may have implications for future armed forces. Those who were left-oriented, Aruna Asaf Ali, Minu Masani then was a leftist, Jayaprakash Narayan, they were more actively supporting, and of course the communists did. Now, why the Mahatma has not done it is, as I said, great mystery. We don't have enough in archives. I'm not an expert on Gandhian studies, but I've spoken to a few people and they say, come and read the archives, see. But considering that he wrote so much and he spoke so much, I've asked lots of Gandhian scholars, and they don't seem to have a very definite idea about why that happened. But very interesting, and that takes me to the peck of what I wanted to say there. Despite that, or whatever it was, for the ratings, like I said, Gandhi, Nehru, our hero and all that, for the ratings they were always following the Satyagraha model of civic disobedience. And therefore, ladies and gentlemen, I asked, the Navy Foundation itself had circulated this book written by Percy Gorby, The Indian Naval Revolt of 1946. As a PDF, it went around. It is freely available as a PDF copy. Read it. Please read the chapter 5 there. Please read the chapter 5. If you have to do just one thing over the next few days, please read it. It says non-violence and nationalism. And it is interesting. This officer, Lieutenant Gorby, is a British officer, RINVR, the Navy as it is called. He takes Punnu Khan or Mohammed Shoaib Khan to the club for a drink on the evening, and they have this absolutely fabulous, dazzling conversation on nature of communism, on nature of non-violence, civil disobedience, how it this one, and if you see it, you will not believe this is a young man in his 20s. He is showing such amazing grasp of world affairs. He is showing such amazing grasp of national affairs. He is showing such great understanding of what non-violence is all about. And he says this is not a mutiny. Only Indian leaders like Gandhi and Nehru who have a deep understanding of problems can lead the path out of suffering and poverty. So, there are these various things I have, and he says we are not responsible if communists take advantage. Communists go wherever poverty, hunger and ignorance is there and they'll exploit any such situation. So he's aware of what probably he thinks the communists do. I think you need to read this for his understanding of Gandhian methods and colonialism. And the great mystery is that we don't know what happened to M.S. Khan after he was given a one-way ticket. Nobody has been able to find out where this gentleman went and what happened to him. I know, sir, that's an incomplete answer, but that's the best I could sum up.
Good morning, sir. I'm Commander Bhadre. Right from the First World War, there were political forces outside the Congress who were actually against the Indian supporting war efforts, and to the extent that there were attempts made to stir mutinies in the Indian Army right from that time. So, do you think giving such a little recognition and in fact undermining this event has any link to those forces which were outside the Congress, and since the government was taken over by Congress later, could this have any relation why this mutiny was undermined?
Okay, I'm going to choose my words very, very carefully while answering this because I don't intend to get political about it. I'll answer it as an academic. 2 or 3 things. One is that, you got to see simply what happened. The interpretation, the motives, the biases, I'll leave it to the individuals. So, yes, Indians took part in both world wars and they did very well too. And I believe that ought to be celebrated too because we contributed a great deal. So I'm not in agreement with those people who criticize our participation in the war and saying that we did it under a foreign flag. No, I think it was important in the context of those times what they did. And in any case, it is what they did and that needs recognition. I have myself written about Indian participation in both the world wars. Similarly, I believe that the naval uprising and other revolts, mutinies and the other things that happened in parallel need to be seen for the fact that it was now people fed up. The armies realized in some reasons because they saw in World War II they were not inferior to other nations. They were benchmarking themselves against with other navies, other peoples they were meeting. So they saw themselves not as inferior to anyone. So now they said, yeah, we are fed up, there are lots of promises made, and the time has come. In every nation's history, a decisive point comes, or crossing the red line, so to say. Now this is the red line for us, and we are fed up. So I think all of them need to be seen. All of them need to be seen for what they were individually. As to the second part of your question, yes, of course, there is no doubt that, as I myself brought out, this was forgotten historically. Some reasons for the ambivalence could be what many of you have suggested, uprising. Other reasons could be that the revolutionary movement, other violent vectors probably did not get as much say in the post-independence historical writings. But is that necessarily due to any deliberate effort? Is that due to any malefides from anyone? I think as an academic, I'll say pass to the question. Thank you.
Good morning, sir.
Ms. Janvi would like to continue.
I would just like to add a few things here. So when you're comparing the political leadership during the First World War and the Second World War, we have to take into consideration that these were 2 different sets of people. During the First World War, it was a moderate set of Congress who were into the prayer and petition method, who thought that, okay, this is the chance to prove our loyalty towards the British, so that probably in the next few years when we put forth our demands for independence, they will accept. This was the first thing. And the First World War was 1914 to 1918. The independence movement is starting after the arrival of Mahatma Gandhi in the year 1919, where non-cooperation movement and all begins. Correct? So 1919 onwards to 1945, when we see the political leadership has changed, non-cooperation movement, your civil disobedience movement has started. There are a lot of factions that are political happenings, are going around. Also, mass migration, there were famines, mass migration was happening with your indentured labor going in and around other countries. So these were some of the reasons why the political leadership also thought during the second part that, okay, the August offer was given precisely for this reason, that the political leadership was not happy with when Lord Lithgow directly declared that, okay, India is a part of the Second World War without consulting the political leadership. So that is the reason we can say that this is the difference between the political.
Discussable. I think we'll take the last question now.
May?
Yeah. Somebody here had stood up earlier.
Good morning, sir. This is Dr. Gaurav Asukar from SIRS. My question to both of the speakers is in the context of INA and Netaji Subhash Chandra's role. The initial plan was to include through Arakan's and initiate a popular uprising in the state of Bengal. That failed, unfortunately, because they were captured and later on trials were held. So in that context, what was the role of INA trials? That was only the moral inspirations which were drawn by the RINA, or there's more to it, like any other meanings to it as well? What is your research there about it?
See, the INA trials had more or less got the whole nation simmering at that time. If you remember, the INA trials, the three conspirators was one Sikh, one Muslim and a Hindu. Okay, and that had united the whole country beyond caste lines. So with all the sailors, in the uniform you are homogeneous in nature, one soldier to another soldier. With the INA trials going on, a lot of nationalistic fervor had rubbed off on the ratings also, and they said, we want the trials, and all the people arrested. If I'm not mistaken, there were close to about 1,200 INA soldiers who were arrested, undergoing trials in Red Fort. They wanted them released. So there was a connection, but this was one of the demands of the strike committee which was going on. We'll take one last question from Commander Vadera.
Good afternoon, Commander Vadera, retired but not retired. First of all, my compliments to Commander Kessler and Janvi for bringing out beautifully the whole essence of the last war of independence or uprising. I wish it is a part of sub-courses. I don't know whether it is there or not, but I think each naval officer getting commissioned, whether in a Naval Academy as a or at Cochin, should know this without any doubt. Even like Heritage Walk in Naval Dockyard, I don't know how many of young officers know the history of the Naval Dockyard. It's got so much of thing to say. My question is that you have brought out how the history of the uprising was almost completely obliterated and forgotten after independence. Any idea about why it happened and what could be the reason behind it? Thank you.
Very quick, brief answers considering the time. Firstly, as far as INA, I think Captain Durai has answered. So I'll just quickly give 10 seconds answer. Please remember that the ratings called themselves the Indian National Navy after the Indian National Army. They called themselves Azad Hindis after the Azad Hind Fauj. They wanted the release of the INA people, and the INA people in turn also supported this, and these together were seen. But of course, there were certain fundamental differences too, we can talk about it. But were there deep connections? Not necessarily so. It was inspirational, it was modern. Coming to what Vadera sir says, to take off from the answer to what I told Commander Atul, why did we leave this out of our history? And again, it is mysterious. One possible reason could be a certain sense of ambiguity about where to locate this episode in historiography, in our syllabus, in our education, so to say. The second is, was there a general reluctance to play down on other than the non-violent vectors? Recent writings by people like Sanjeev Sanyal, he's written a book called The Revolutionaries and all that. They have suggested that this was indeed so. So probably the freedom struggle was more multi-hued, and some other spokes in that struggle did not get the kind of recognition that they did, and many people argue on that point of view. So we can have whatever individual interpretations there. The third reason could be that it's very interesting. In academic circles, there is enough information. Academically, the uprising has been written about enough. You'll get lots of books even now. You'll get newspaper reports. The recency of the event means that you'll still have lots of information. Until recently, people were alive, those who had taken part in the uprising. The problem is that for some strange reason, in popular culture, it has not been adequately spoken, written. There have been no movies. I mean, I think that conversation between Kunu Khan and Lieutenant Borghi, or this fantastic cast of characters of the ratings, all of the officers can make some great movies, Fantastic movies can be made. Plays can be done a lot. There was a play called Kalol by Utpal Dutt which was banned. That was stringently left. But a lot more can happen in public culture about the uprising. And I think the MHS is doing an excellent job there in terms now recently. The Navy has been doing very well recently. Last couple of years we had the Raksha Mantri visit that place. Earlier you had a seminar there. You had on 22nd March. 2 years back, you had Aditya Thackeray as the culture minister visiting that place. So there's been lots more happening now. And of course, Pramod Kapoor's book, which was discussed, I was the moderator with him at the Jaipur Lit Fest. So probably we are making some progress. But even today, if you ask one young person on the streets, have you heard about this? Do you know the importance of this place? They don't know. So possibly one suggestion to MHS next year, think of having a heritage walk for a week before and after the event with this one where you touch upon all these places. We should know the history of these. And a lot of things that academics and the media can also do. I think the Navy has done its bit. So you're right, sir. That's a problem that public culture has not celebrated this event enough. Whether political motives or not, I leave that discussion for another day. But certainly we need to make amends for the amnesia of the past and make amends by going into future.
Comrade Vinay Babu and Comrade Ashish Khanna, Director ADG Maritime History Society, Comrade Keshu, Ms. Gandhi, Admiral Shekhawat, flag officers, my naval colleagues, ladies and gentlemen. You will agree with me that this has been a well-spent Sunday morning, going into and reliving the annals of history, especially a critical moment in the growth of the Indian Navy. This question has been asked by some of you and ably answered by the panel. Why have we ignored this seminal event? Why have we not given it greater importance? Why have we not put it greater into context? Perhaps is best answered by the events this morning as well as what we've been doing over the last couple of years. We ourselves, over a period of time, viewed our history differently. We interpreted in a certain narrow fashion. If you looked at it purely as naval personnel who put on uniform, any act of indiscipline is intolerable. Convocation put across, every event has to be seen in the context. So for the first several decades, there have been attempts in the past, and I share with you, personally both Convocation and myself as young lieutenants have been asked to examine this very same mutiny and look at the scope or whether it could be interpreted in a different manner. It's a twist of history that both of us at that time, a little over 33 years ago, felt that it could not be seen beyond the narrow vision of naval discipline. But as he's moved on to be a master historian and learning a little bit from him over the decades as I have seen it, we've adapted even our personal views to look at it in a wider context. And that's what we need to do. So 3 key takeaways other than this that I'd like you to ponder about. 1, the role of the Indian Armed Forces in these 2 world wars and what it means to India's stature and standing today. This debate and discussion that these were soldiers who were fighting for an imperial power again has to be seen in context. Mahatma Gandhi has been mentioned. It bears note that the great man himself put on uniform once in the World War in the late 19th century and set up an ambulance corps, and even volunteered to set up a similar ambulance corps and put on uniform in the First World War, but his health reasons could not allow him to do so. He is on record as having said and written that when he looked at the soldier, he was reminded of Arjuna coming down to the battlefield to do his duty. So where do we view people who put on uniform in the First and Second World Wars? They were fighting for a duly constituted authority under a legal order and very much for their country. Even in the Second World War, the national leadership offered to the then colonial empire that we're with you in fighting for the principles of democracy. But we can't be fighting for you for democracy when we are a colony ourselves. Hence, we will support you against fascism and Nazism, give us independence, and we shall fight alongside you as an independent India. That really was a twist. With the colonial powers held out to them and said, you fight with us and we'll give you independence and completion, a promise they tried to renege from, but for the impact of the Royal Indian Mutiny and the impact that it had on their psyche. So there was never any doubt that at that particular stage, please remember when the non-cooperation and the civil disobedience and the Quit India movement was going on, between 40 to 42 was exactly the period of time of a massive expansion of the British Indian Armed Forces. That's exactly when it went from being a force which was about, Shrikant correct me, about less than 1 lakh, went on to rise to be about 24 lakhs in that period of 2 years. That's at the same time when you had the fall of Singapore and you had the Japanese almost coming to the country, that the mass mobilization of your forces, of people standing up and fighting, rose to its peak. The national leadership could very well have set steps to have halted that recruitment. They didn't. Because the cause was common. The methods were nuanced. So where do we view all these people who fought? You just have to look at that slide that showed you in 1942 itself. India was an independent signatory to the formation of the Declaration of the Formation of the United Nations. Independent as a colony. Even when the United Nations was founded, we are one of the founding members of the United Nations. We signed up on 30th October, 6 days after the United Nations was formed as a technical age, but we are considered amongst the 50 founding members of the United Nations. And one amongst the original 23 signatories, again, as a colony. What is the reason for this stature in the world? It is because of the contribution of the Indian Armed Forces in both the world wars. So let there be no doubt on this score that at the time, if today, at any stage, you have world fame and world renown, it is not just on the ancient civilization which we should be richly proud about, not just on the phenomenal economic growth which we should be proud about, absolutely on the basis of a wonderful civilization, the history, the ethos and the culture, but also on the strength of the Indian Armed Forces. And that's where we stand today. The second small point that comes out across is how we view acts of indiscipline and mutiny. Shrikant brought it out in his talk very well. At the Battle of Junagadh, or the refusal of somebody to proceed in the path of duty in harm's way, the answer is very clear. Ruthlessly, strictly, in accordance with the tenets of naval service, absolutely as per discipline. But the same was not applicable just a year earlier to what happened at the time of the Royal Indian Mutiny. At that time, while it sparked off as a mutiny, the mutiny sparked into an uprising, the naval uprising sparked into a national uprising, and yes, it could have gone out of control, which could have been terrible for this country. And rightly so, with the benefit of hindsight, we can have our views. The national and the naval leadership at that time asked for calm, cooling down, bring things back under control, with an assurance that very much independence around the corner, because what the National Uprising did was convinced any last vestige of ill-conceived dreams on the behalf of the colonial power that they could continue with this travesty of history any further. And with that sense of assurance, on the back of the naval uprising and the national uprising, further actions took place, on the basis of which today we've got a strong modern India. A very small third point, if you noticed over there, back in the Second World War, the Navy had a lot of women. It took 46 years, the Navy again took the first step of inducting women into the armed forces in 92. Took another 23 years after the first 46 years, and they got inducted into a combat role with flying as observers in combat aircraft. And a short 7 to 8 years later, we now got them commanding ships. So, more power to you. You know the reason why we call all our ships she. Our strength comes from Nari Shakti, and on a lighter way, we're with you on that. Thank you very much, ladies and gentlemen, and thank you for Congress KSU, for MHS and the Janvi. Please join me in expressing our extreme gratitude to them for the wonderful job they've done.
Thank you so much, sir. As we come to the end of this seminar, it is my privilege to propose a vote of thanks. We thank Commodore Shrikant Keshnur and Ms. Janavi Lokigaonkar for accepting our invitation and for being with us today as our speakers. Your expertise and wisdom have truly enlightened us. Thank you, Commodore Dharai Babu, for moderating this session. This event would not have been possible without the steadfast support of the Headquarters Western Naval Command, Headquarters Maharashtra Naval Area, INS Kunchali, K22, Noik Maharashtra, INS Angre, and WNC Officers Mess. I also extend my sincere thanks to all the invitees who took their time out to be with us. You all have been a great audience. Please join us for high tea served outside the auditorium. Officers and civilian guests are requested to move to the lawns ahead, and sailors and families to the parking area ahead and to my right. A stall of our publications and souvenirs has been set up outside. Do stop by. Our publications are on sale today at a very special discount. Shuttle buses are available outside. You may avail this service to visit the Naval Uprising Memorial at Cooperage after the event. Our researchers will be there to interact with you on site. With that, allow me to sign off. Jai Hind.